Good evening and welcome to The Square. Last week we focused on Umniherero, the 15th annual leadership retreat, and what it entailed. Tonight we're going to focus on two key issues. The first of these, in the first half of the show, will be based on the recently published Monetary Policy and Financial Stability Statement report, which we'll discuss in the first half of the show. And the second half, we will review the closure of over 700 churches in Kigali. As always, I am joined by my lovely co-hosts. My name is Diana Mpisi, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. Charles?
How are you, Dana?
Good, and you?
Good to be with you once again.
Berna, great to have you.
Thank you.
As always. And Ephraim?
Thank you.
Great. So the first of the things, of course, that I'd like to start with is the Monetary Policy and Financial Stability Report. It was very dense, lots of facts and figures. Obviously, there's not much we're going to discuss on it, but as it was a very heavy document. But the key thing that I want to focus on is one of the resolutions. And Berna, this is to you. This particular resolution was stated by the governor of the Central Bank, National Bank of Rwanda, Honorable John Rugangomga, which stated that the National Bank will continue to educate the public and engage with key stakeholders to drive the update of e-payment channels and instruments in a bid to promote a cashless society. Berna, this is indeed a priority for Rwanda, and the question to you and our audiences is, what's your take in this being a reality in 2020?
I think that we've made tremendous progress. I mean, looking at coming from a very low base, almost, I think, 0.3 in 2010. Now we are talking about 26.9% in 2017. Now, we are just a few years to 2020. It would definitely take drastic measures to meet the target. But I think while it's good to have ambitious targets, we have to be realistic in terms of how these targets can be achieved. And seeing what's been going on around the economy with mobile money, mobile wallets, there's a lot of progress. And the reason I say that is because a few years ago, it was difficult to convince a taxi driver that you can pay with your mobile phone. Today, it is possible, and they are warming up to that. Secondly, it was almost unthinkable that you can use your mobile phone to pay a motorcyclist. This year, there's an aggressive campaign to allow most people to be able to pay using their mobile phones. And what that does is, once you begin to roll out massive transactions, like there are so many people using motorcyclists, for instance. So if you take out that cash and you're having these transactions being done on mobile phones, I think that's already tremendous progress. And also, if you look at how the banks have woken up in terms of driving electronic payments, there's a lot of progress. Before, it would take almost 3 months or 6 months to get an ATM card. At the moment, I think it's a maximum of 3 weeks. We have what they call POSs. You have more machines, at least around Kigali, they're everywhere. You have them at supermarkets. You have them in, lots of places are now increasingly warming up to that. And I think that shows us that we're making progress. But I think the challenge at the moment is to get everyone to look at electronic payments as not just a transaction where you say you just make a payment, but move it beyond just payments, and let's have savings, let's have our insurance on our mobile phones, let's have our mutuelle on mobile phones. I know that the government has actually done a lot of work with Irembo, e-governance. There are lots of transactions now that can be done online, lots of services. Almost if you look at the basic services, whether it's Mitwell, whether it's accessing, if you want to apply for a passport, most of these services are online, and you can do the payment online, even the taxes. So that's progress. But how you scale it up to a level where people don't feel obliged, because you see, once it's driven by government, then it's largely because people feel obliged. If you have to pay tax, or you have to access Mitwell. But if we can have innovation around the day-to-day needs that would require mobile or electronic transactions, especially on mobile phones, because I think we are yet to tap into the expansion of the mobile phones that we've seen. We have more people with mobile phones, and you want to see people move beyond using mobile phones for social media or WhatsApp to do more serious business. And there is an opportunity there. And that includes using, and I think Ephraim is more placed with this, we have new technology, blockchain, which is now,
that needs to be broken down. I confess, I'm one of many people, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, blockchain, but
yeah, so we have software. I mean, you just have to look at blockchain as software that allows seamless transactions, you know, whether it's payments, whether it's registration of data, you know, electronic identification. So if we can have our banks, people in the service business take advantage of these technologies, I think it would give us even a push to be able to leapfrog.
Yeah. I think, Dana, just before Ephraim comes in on this, I have one of the things that Bana mentions that tickle my mind is around the governance and the implementation of some of these things, especially the implementation. And it's a bold step in the right direction. But education, and I'm glad that one of the things that the central bank really emphasized was around the education and the awareness around this, because there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in that direction. Today, if you're going, like, I'll give you a practical example of myself. Today, the WASAC, the Water and Sanitation Organization, wanted to disconnect my water at home because they could not see that I had paid my water bill via mobile money. And they told me that, no, you go to the office and confirm that you actually paid by mobile money, and then they will call us and let us know. And then we will ensure that you're not connected. So but we have given you 24 hours to be able to do that. And there are a few more examples. You will go to places, and, especially food and beverages and entertainment hotspots. Yeah, they will conveniently ensure that you do not pay by your card, because it takes a little bit of time for their monies to be credited onto their respective bank accounts, for them to actually be able to receive their cash. So, and
also they also incur a certain percentage.
That
using
is, yes.
It's actually minimal.
It's minimal, yes.
It's minimal.
I think 0.02 for some of the banks. But the bigger problem is it's not the same. It does not apply across board for all the banks. The most efficient one, I've been told, is Equity, whereby you can actually get your money real time. For some of the other banks, it takes a day or two.
We need a disclaimer if you're mentioning Equity.
No, I have been told. That's why I have been told. So I think some of those things need to be ironed out by the central bank, such that it is not. Again, an example I had today. It took me a while to pay for a lunch bill at one of the restaurants, because they needed four POSs, the POSs that you're mentioning. So there's still a lot of streamlining that needs to be done for us to arrive at that 26.9% of the cashless economy penetration. Yes.
I think you raise a really pertinent issue because if you look at the adoption of most of these innovations, it goes back to how user-friendly is it, how efficient is it. So if you have a network breaking down, definitely for the user, that is an inconvenience and they will just run away from it. But if we can address issues that you raise, because sometimes you try to use the card, or if it's mobile money and then they tell you the network is off, already that will put you off. And even more complex, simple things like if you lose your PIN, it takes you to physically walk to, whether it's a bank or to do the change. Ideally, there should be a way you can still, manage this, whether it's a call center, whether you can still do it on your phone. Yeah. So yeah, we have to find a way of addressing issues that can allow, yes.
But
yes.
I really like, Brenna, the way you said we need to be a bit innovative in that, moving to a cashless economy, innovative in how to make these day-to-day activities accessible for people and how they can actually, become cashless. But whether it's using your phone for all these different things you mentioned, that innovation is something it's interesting to note. Ephraim, is there something you want to add on this? You want to break down cryptocurrency?
Not today.
Is the blockchain guy?
Not today.
No. Can I tell you the biggest benefit of a cashless economy? It's two things. One, it allows for us to have, I would say, cheaper capital available. That's the first thing. And then two, it allows for us a faster rate of transaction between accounts. Now, if just a simple... Ideally. There's a simple, if you understand the way banks work, like what a bank is designed to create money out of, or at least to multiply money. And actually, it's something called, it's some technical jargon called a credit multiplier. Now, what a credit multiplier basically means is if I have 1 million and I take it to the bank, I know in Rwanda our credit multipliers, the central bank allows a bank what they call 20%. It's a ratio of your debt to your deposits. So the loans you give out to what your customers have deposited. Now, if I deposit 1 million and let's say my bank, X bank, applies that rate. So it is allowed to loan out 800,000. It gives that loan to D. D then deposits 20%, the 80% they give to Charlie. Charlie then pays Berner, Berner deposits, and they go so on and so forth until multiplying this money. Now, the beauty about cashless is that you can reduce that credit multiplier to even 0, to the point where they don't have to have physical cash they don't actually have to have physical cash to be able to operate. So basically, you'll find it's just a number that represents value, and the rest of that money is put into an investment portfolio. So what these banks would then do is then invest that money and give a loan to an investor who set up a plant. That plant will employ people. Their salaries will be paid electronically. It's so cashless economies help. They are catalysts to economic growth. And that's what people don't actually take the time to understand, that it's not even just about the convenience of paying. It can actually allow you to access loans at a much cheaper rate. And another thing, because I can tell you this, banks spend so much money in something called cash management. So the security vehicles that transport the money, the insurance that comes with it, the management just hiring the staff to manage the branch capitalization in liquid cash. And then even when you go to a higher level at the central bank, the economic policies that need to be implemented for something called money supply is very critical, because you find francs chasing very little dollars because there's very little dollars in the market versus, and those are things that if we had a cashless economy, we could create more stability in our economy, and we could also help ourselves accelerate that growth that we need. So for me, a cashless economy, by all means, is necessary, especially me as a business person, because I can't sustainably borrow at 17% for 20 years. I need at some point that 17% to drop to a 15%, to drop to a 12%, to drop to a 5% to drop to a 3% that it is in some Western markets. So that is one of the
pros, the biggest pros.
I would say it's the largest.
The largest.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you raised the issue of the cost of borrowing, and I think the reason why you're paying, and I must say, at 17%, you're actually getting a very good rate.
By what standard?
Because ordinary people are paying more than 17%.
No, but you see, I'm saying 17%, that's what the bank tells me, but then they're going to factor in bank charges, VAT.
Okay.
So you
some
find
people
it to arrive at 19 realistically.
There are some people who are actually told 20%.
By a reputable
Because,
bank
you know,
or a microfinance institution.
I mean, whether it's a microfinance or commercial bank, what we're saying is the cost of borrowing has to come down. But going back to what we're discussing in terms of the cashless economy, there is potential that if we can get more products, for instance, on our mobile phones, for instance, incentives to boost savings, we'll be able to access more cheap money.
And that's another thing. So when you talk of savings as right now, the reason why we borrow at 17% is, yes, there's the rate that the central bank puts, and then because most of our banks don't have enough money locally in their coffers to loan out, what they do is they have to normally get syndicated loans from a lot of international lenders. And what ends up happening is that they're borrowing this money on in a foreign currency. So it'd be dollars, euros, or pounds. Now what happens is that they have to hedge risk.
Yeah,
so hedging this risk,
your currency mismatch.
Exactly. So what guys do is they'll throw in about 5% to cover that forex fluctuation. I know some guys are prudent, they put 6%. Then you find sometimes they get even a guarantor, an insurer, to guarantee, to grant insurance for any fluctuation above that rate. And then on top of that, they factor in the administrative costs, then they factor in VAT, and then you find that by the time you get the money, it's coming to you at 19%, just because you're not saving. And this is one thing that people need to understand, that if you can develop a culture of saving, it puts you in a position where at some point, if you do it, the next man does it, the next man does it, it's kind of like a circle. The idea is that you will be able to access affordable credit because it's localized funds, it's coming from a local source. I mean, the same thing is happening with the government. The rate at which the government is able to borrow is cheaper because it's giving out Rwandan franc bonds. Actually, they offer the investor a higher interest rate because for them they are confident, because they're confident that if we borrow in francs, we're going to be able to pay it in francs. Versus when they go get a loan from the World Bank and it's in dollars, or it's from the EU and it's in euros, it puts them in a very tight position where they're like, okay. So I would say saving is very critical to economic growth. It is probably one of the backbones because we need capital to drive growth.
Absolutely.
And to drive productivity. Productivity doesn't happen in the air. So that capital comes at a cost. The lower the cost, the better it is for everyone. Not just even the business people, but even the citizens themselves, because it helps curb inflation, it helps curb inflation, mainly the cost of the products that these people are buying, because the cost of capital for these businesses is lower.
It's lower.
Yeah. So it's just it's a cycle. Save money, cheaper capital, cheaper cost of production, cheaper goods, more money for you to invest and save, and vice versa.
And happier people.
And happier.
Generally.
Man, if I'm spending 20% less on my milk, I'm a happy man.
You're happy, of course. So while we're on savings, Ephraim, I'd like to hear from you, especially as the owner of various businesses. So it's been said about our savings culture. And I'm focusing on Rwanda, our income may have grown over the last couple of years, but our behavioral patterns have not changed. So saving and income is not, it doesn't correlate. And, there are countries in Asia that, typically save 30% of their incomes, just simply because before making a single expense. So this savings culture, it's something I know we've discussed very many people have discussed in this country, in various fora. What's your take on it? In Rwanda?
In Rwanda. I was reading somewhere, I think it's the FinScope report. They were saying that...
For which year?
I'm not too sure. But I think maybe 2016.
2016.
Yeah. They were saying that 82%, 86% of Rwandan adults, above 80%, save, which is interesting. And I say that interesting because I wanted to understand the definition of saving. Because you see, some people would think saving is taking money and putting it on an account, or taking money and putting it under your pillow, or in your mattress, or like, but the definition of saving as per what I would even just say market definitions would state is saving is putting money into a productive asset. So this could be a fixed deposit account, this could be a piece of land, this could be some cows, this could be some trees, but apparently, and which is, I think there's a correlation, and probably, Charlie, you know about it from the land aspect, considering that's your business, but a lot of Rwandans I interact with, big, small, young, old, well off, with a little bit of money to spare. Everybody is looking for an investment to tie up that cash. And you can see that, and it makes sense. I think it's in correlation with that. But there's also an element to that people haven't really, we talk about it, but it's not exploited for its capacity and its true, its true potential. These are the SACCOs. SACCOs, because unlike banks who also supplement some of the capital, the deposits they receive from their clients with international loans that they can pay over a period of time, SACCOs depend heavily on the contributions of their members, which ensures a sense of ownership and also a sense of equity. So what happens is that, and just if you think about like traditionally, and this is again, when you talk about culture, the dynamism of our culture is that even when technology comes in and we have these innovations, most of these things are historically, you can trace them back historically. In societies, what would happen is when you talk of a store, you'd find that people in a community would harvest products and they would bring them to a location and they would save. Like, let's say I harvest 1,000 kilograms of maize and I only need 500 for my family. I probably sell another 200. Then the balance, which is 300.
Save and keep it for later use.
And not even just me, would all take it to a public store. And there'll be a record saying Ephraim deposited 300. Now what would happen is that if there was somebody who needed the 300, he would take the 300 kilos that I've put there and promise that for the next harvest, he'll bring back 300 plus 20, which represents interest. And that what would happen is that I would then earn 20 on my 300. So you find that the savings culture is historically, can be historically traced. And I think SACCOs, I think of 46% of that 86 is, or 41 of the adults who save, close to 50% save with SACCOs.
Let me say something about savings. I think it has to pain.
Do you save?
Yes, I do.
You're sure?
Yes, I do.
And how do you save?
And how do you save?
In a painful way.
You buy land? Do you buy land? Do you have money on that account?
In a compulsory way. And that's the point I want to raise, that it has to pain for it to make a bit of a difference. It has, it has to be, for it to have an impact, the element of it being a bit painful or forceful is where it's going to be a bit impactful. And I'll give two examples. CSS Zegama, which is arguably the most successful financial institution in Rwanda, survives purely because of compulsory savings from the army, police, prisons, the security forces. Now, if you look at how the security forces in our country are remunerated purely from a salary perspective, you would imagine how are these soldiers, policemen, prisons officers able to afford the lifestyle and the living that they have. It is because they are able to leverage off their compulsory savings. However, whatever amount of money you earn as a policeman or an army officer or a prisons officer, 10% of that goes into compulsory savings. Now, they are able to leverage off that to get borrowings and what have you. Now, very recently, the teachers, Umwari Musako, were able to do that. You know, they went around making a lot of noise, were paid little money, and so on and so forth. Not until they were said, no. They were told, no, unless you understand that however little it is, as long as you stop living a hand-to-mouth lifestyle, you'll never be able to take a front stride in the right direction. So I think the biggest employer in Rwanda is the government. If we are able to introduce compulsory savings.
But you know, compulsory savings is already there.
Really? How?
Pension.
Oh.
No,
But is that the same
because
thing?
it goes towards your pension.
No, but you see, it's a saving
Yes.
regardless. And
Yes,
it's taken and it's a must.
you only benefit from it
When you retire?
No,
when you retire.
You could actually
Yeah.
liquidate your savings in advance. It's like any other investment. Like, for example, Charlie, you know, if I buy land today, right, and the idea is that if I hold on to that land, it will appreciate, let's say, 100, 200%. But I'm impatient and I decide to sell the land after 6 months. I'm not going to get the same kind of return on investment as the next man.
But you're not
next to me.
obliged.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
So pension, by law, an employer is to register all his employees.
Correct.
They've even the regulators passed a law, and I'm sure it's even in this report, that you can apply for a license as a private pension. And this is a challenge even for employers, where you can create saving schemes within your own company and get it licensed. So if you have 10 employees and every month they are also saving, you can have your own private pension on top of the government pension. So I would say that there is a forced pension and a forced saving culture, but people don't view pension as a saving.
Okay, forced is almost an
No,
extreme
or compulsory.
word.
Let's not use forced.
Forced,
Compulsory.
I think, is
That's
an extreme,
extreme.
yeah.
Compulsory.
I think the
for you to
issue
But
that
actually,
we-
it's forced. It's by law.
I think the issue
Compulsory.
Okay.
Semantics, I know, but
I think beyond pension, what we need as an economy is a diversification of these savings. Because remember, if you're contributing to pension, it's going to RSSB. But we are saying we need money in banks, we need money that can finance our development. And how that happens is you need individual savings. And to do that, well, compulsory may work, but the other way around is create incentives.
What incentive?
Create incentives.
Because there's
for
interest,
instance,
there's,
I'll
interest,
give you
there's
an
a fixed term
example.
deposit. There's a fixed term deposit. You know, I'm saying this. I think the conversation is not that Rwandans need to save more. For me personally, I feel like
But don't
RSSB.
disregard
I
it.
feel like RSSB needs to diversify, and I feel like they are, but they need to diversify that portfolio a little bit more because those are Rwandan savings. And I say this because even if we did individual savings in banks, actually, is an RSSB one of the largest shareholders in Bank of Kigali?
And if you are the
I mean,
banks as well.
RSSB in this economy provides almost a large chunk of the depots.
Yeah.
And I think it's always RSSB and the telecoms, yeah? But we need to have ordinary Rwandans appreciate that they need to save money.
So
They
you
need
want
to
you-
save-
so they take cash out because I want to understand this. They take cash and they put it onto an account.
No, that's not sufficient.
Uh-huh.
We're saying it's just
One
one
way,
way,
okay.
yeah? And we're saying if the banks could offer more interest rates, I mean more, if maybe you're saving your 1 million or something, the bank should offer you an attractive, rate. But what usually happens is the banks are happy to charge you more on the loan, but when you say, I'm giving you my money, they're not actually keen to give you an attractive deposit rate. We have that issue. But beyond that, I think beyond that, we are saying we need to have a culture. We need to have a culture where everyone understands that you have to save. Whatever way, whether you decide to buy land, whether you decide, there has to be a form of saving, because that is what will drive the kind of growth.
And just to add to that, I like what you mentioned earlier before the show, but you said you can save, yes, but are you saving and keeping that money in a bank? You save to invest.
Yeah.
Ideally, that should be the situation.
Definitely,
So, in addition to a savings culture, we need to understand, the value of saving and what else.
Yeah, and like we've got, if we take the Rwandan Stock Exchange, for instance, as an example, they're still trying to get the private sector to list. We are still trying to get more activity on the Rwanda Stock Exchange. That is one form of saving. You could decide to buy shares worth
1 million francs, or
yeah,
even 100,000.
I think giving credit to where it's due.
Yeah.
But quickly,
The
tell us
SACCOs, yes.
quickly before we go for the break. Carry on.
Yeah, giving credit to where it's due. The SACCOs have been a fantastic revelation for our economy. And we've gone great stride in terms of encouraging these SACCOs. I personally belong to about 4 of them. You save here, you save there, you save there. Now, when you look at...
You're a very rich man. I'm even about to say
you'll be very surprised that when you go to the rural areas, these people save as much as 200 francs or as little as 200 francs a month.
Yeah.
But what the 200 francs is able to do for them and their families is extremely phenomenal. So it is purely a mindset thing, and I can't overemphasize your point, Bena, that the encouragement that needs to be done for these circles to be remunerated more, to be incentivized more, such that 200 francs cumulatively that will make 10,000 will be remunerated at 4 or 5%.
Do you know how much the rate is on a fixed term deposit account is?
It varies.
It varies upon what? The duration you've put the money in.
Correct.
Yeah.
And
now the question is, let's say 1 year.
Yes.
And let's say it's an average investment of, let's say a normal household, I put my 20K aside every month, and I've saved it. I reach the end of the year, I have 240, and I deposit that. What interest rate is the bank going to give me?
If you're extremely lucky, maybe it will average at about 8.5%.
Now the question is the rate of inflation. And I'm saying this because it's very important. You don't necessarily have to take it to the bank. You can buy yourself a piece of land. There are so many ways. But the question I'm saying is that if you cannot put the responsibility of developing a savings culture on banks. The reason why I say that is because it's like saying, I who buy my sugar at $10 need to sell it at $5 so people can consume more sugar. It's impractical and it's not sustainable.
Can you hold that thought? Okay. Hold that thought. And we'll be back after the break. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to The Square. Tonight we're discussing 2 key things. The first is the state of the economy, and which was during the first half of the show. And the second, we're also going to review the closure of over 700 churches in Kigali. But before we get to that, before the break, we were still talking about the savings culture. Ephraim?
Yes.
I'm sorry to have cut you short, but we needed to go for break. But there's a lot you have to say, and Brenna, 2 minutes.
Okay.
Less than 2 minutes,
in
a nutshell.
Yeah, in a nutshell. He talked about the return on investment of land being higher than, I think you said 15% compared to the average, the appreciation per annum versus the 8.5% that you get from the bank. Mind you, The beauty about fixed term deposit, if I'm not wrong, is that they don't tax you on the returns that you get. I'm not sure. I have to confirm that. But I'm saying this because there has to be a diversity in the options that we have. And for me, it comes down to stuff like when we do get the savings, in the case of these compulsory cash deposits, like in the case of RSSB, some of the investment options that we take under such a business don't necessarily reflect the needs in the economy. I'm just putting it out there. We could invest that money from RSSB better. And the interesting thing about RSSB's design model is that even if they make zero return on the capital, they will still be able to fund the pensions.
Berna, you had a lot to say.
I mean, RSSB is for another day. But just going back to savings, I think we need to be realistic in terms of where we are as a country. We are a developing country with huge development needs. And the savings that we need, actually, in my view, we actually need cash. We need that as a private, as someone in the private sector, if you walk to BK should be able to give you 200 million.
But do you want hard cash or e-cash?
I mean, whatever it is, you have your business plan, yeah? If you walk into any bank and say, I need 200 million, they should be able to do that. At the moment, I don't think that's the case.
Why?
Okay, because you have a lot of, most of these banks are constrained in terms of financing. That's one, but also there's the central bank regulation, of course, that limits how much each bank can give. But what we're saying is, if we can have more savings, at least, you'll have more ordinary people. If you need maybe 50 million, it shouldn't be a problem.
Do you know the regulation? Do you know the regulation at the central bank is tougher on banks that receive commercial banks? These are banks that receive deposits from the citizens than it is on an investment bank that receives money from one shareholder or a couple of private shareholders. They will take off your head if you go take the citizens' money and actually give it haphazardly. They fine you heavily on what they call provisions.
Which is good, because that's risk management.
No, but you see, the idea is that that means that I don't think necessarily loans will be easier. I think loans will be cheaper, but they'll be harder to get because you have deposits. The central bank is going to try to.
One of the biggest challenges that all banks will always have is currency mismatch. Currency mismatch, either in terms of the currency, that is euros, dollars versus francs, or currency mismatch in terms of long-term demands versus short-term deposits. Now, the way banks typically do it, and that's why the central bank will crack a whip in regards to what you're saying, is that you cannot have short-term deposits and expect to lend long-term, because it will definitely create a bit of a problem. If you do that, which what most banks do, they will price the long-term money a lot higher, because then the risk is a lot higher. It's very, very simple mathematics. The only way to go about this is encourage long-term savings.
Absolutely.
Yes,
absolutely.
and I agree.
So we are
but
I'm
saying that loans are not going to be. It's not going to be easier to get.
It can be. It can be if we incentivize, as Bana said, if we incentivize long-term savings.
But you see, the question
yes.
is, the question is,
and I like to give an example of the army. I am a very strong believer in the army and their motto. Unfortunately, I'm too old to join the army. But the way CSS Zigama has been able to do their motto, and it's very, very simple. Compulsory long-term savings is what has enabled them to lend their officers and men money at 13.5.
No, you see, we're talking about cost. I'm not talking. I think cost can.
No,
be
they're
managed.
able to hedge.
But you see, because you talked of the incentive, the issue here is not the banks. The banks would want to give money. It is the central bank. The central bank has a fiduciary responsibility to the citizens to protect their interests. If you take money from 20, 30 people and it goes into a bank, and then one businessman goes and, by the name of Ephraim, and goes and takes those people's money. Then by doing his business, he offshores the money or finds ways to run away with the money. Who is responsible to those people who have deposited the money? It is not the bank. It's not the bank, the commercial bank. It is actually the central bank. The central bank has to go back to that commercial bank and find them and ensure that that money is put there.
I think that's fine.
So I'm saying that loans will get harder to get with more savings, but they will get cheaper.
I don't agree with that.
Unless,
I don't think so.
okay.
I think
Okay, I don't agree with that.
I'll ask
Because, I mean, the central bank is the business.
Can you let me do my job
yes,
and moderate?
yes.
Can I moderate?
But just a personal request that probably the best way to solve our problem here is let's have a full show on those
Absolutely.
things
Next.
and get the
experts as well.
Yes, to tell us.
Absolutely. Yeah, because this is a conversation. But today we're focusing on two
and that
issues.
expert will probably be the moderator.
No, I totally agree. So, Charles,
Yes.
this question is for you. So over 700 churches were closed recently in Kigali. And I know we briefly touched on this last week, the whole closure of churches and everything. But tonight we want to just take a slightly deep dive. And I'd like to start with the disclaimer that all of us on this show are devout Christians. I'm an Adventist, you're a Pentecost, you're Catholic. Anglican, Catholic. We are Christians. But tonight, some of the things we want to discuss are looking into Christianity in connection with these churches, why they were closed down, and having a generally wider view. So Charles, I'll start with you. I read in a Zambian online publication earlier last year that African Pentecostalism in Africa has led to a new breed of mentally lazy young people who now see God as a rewarder of mediocrity. This is because, apparently, pastors who preach per se about emulating hard work and discipline and whatnot. They preach, more about miracles happening through tithing, through fasting, and so on and so forth. What's your take on this, Charles?
I don't know that you picked on me because I am the most Christian person on the show. But two things. One, I will tackle the question on the Zambians on its own and their thinking on its own, but also
It's just one person
the
in a
Kigali,
Zambian publication. It's not the whole of
but
Zambia.
I will concur a lot because and they picked on the Pentecostal arrangements. I think there's a general problem. There's a general problem because people believe, there's a cross-section of people that believe in quick success. And some of that quick success is being promised through religious circles. And I say this again without fear or favor. I probably said this at our show last week. But I have a particular bone of contention to pick with born-again churches. That is
And these
where
are the majority of the ones that were
yes,
closed around Kigali.
Yeah. And that is where you'll actually find the biggest problem. As opposed to the conventional, your Catholic, your Anglican, your Adventist. Yes. That is, you will find very few problems there. But most of the other people, and I have a very good friend called Pastor Hassan who appeared on one of the local FM stations the other day, and he explained it in a simple way. He said that the conventional churches do not have a big problem because they are well established and therefore they have the means to have good structures and what have you. But as a real estate practitioner, I'll tell you something else to do with the Kigali City Master Plan. The Kigali City Master Plan, through its zoning guidelines, talks about what you need to do. That particular section is RI, religious institutions. And religious institutions are pretty much treated like schools and kindergartens and restaurants and what have you. They can cohabit with other places, residentials, commercials and what have you, subject to approval of the one-stop center. There are two or three areas that are extremely important as per the Kigali City Master Plan. One of them I'll pick out is the size of the land. You should be able to sit on at least 5,000 square meters. The second one is on parking. And don't ask me why they said that the Protestant, no, churches, sorry, churches have to provide for one parking for every 50 seats. And then the other religions have to provide for one parking for every 50 square meters of praying area. Now, I don't know where that distinction comes from, but the bigger point is around the provision for parking. The third one is around noise and sound and that pollution generally speaking. And because churches have lost, very many, especially the born-again churches, have lost the morality of why people go to church, and it has become a business. They think that because they owe society an obligation to the same things you're saying, provide miracles, provide food to the needy, provide clothes to those who need clothing, provide food for the hungry, and so on. Therefore, that social fabric that social fabric gap that they are covering should make people turn a blind eye on the zoning and master plan requirements. People should forget about that. No, that's where they're getting it wrong. The other bigger point that I want to raise is, of recent, and this is not unique to Rwanda, you're having a lot of crime, criminality, disillusionment happening in the churches. Just towards the end of last year, we had a pastor being imprisoned for being suspected for having played a key role in the murder of his wife. In one of the leading born-again churches, we had an apostle sack his 2 bishops. And we can give examples until the cows come home. So by virtue, and we have to remember that we live in a society that everybody has to be everyone's keeper. If all these things are happening in churches and not in our homes or elsewhere, we have to wake up. And that is why Rwanda Governance Board and National Police and all the other organizations have woken up to say, no, there is a problem in these churches. Fortunately for them, they had a scapegoat of the zoning regulations and the Kigali City Master Plan, which is very easy to clamp down. But there is actually a bigger problem on what is happening inside the churches.
Can I tell you?
Yes.
Can I tell you my 2 cents on it? You know, even having a logical debate about this is impossible, because religion touches probably the fabric of who we are. Some of us derive meaning from our religious affiliations. And again, we could sit here and classify and say the born-agains, the Catholics. If we wanted, we could talk about the role of the Catholics in the 1994 genocide and say we should close Catholic churches down. But that doesn't solve the issue. For me, when I look at this issue of the churches, we talked about it last week, about the accountability of our leaders. Somebody made a mistake. They allowed too many churches without proper regulation. I mean, really, how can a church get registered? And I think that's also why His Excellency was shocked at the number that were being closed down. So you're telling me of all the churches you guys registered,
You're assuming they actually got registered.
No, that's what the statement coming from RGB is saying, that there were 1,400 registered churches in Kigali. Registered. This is the statement from them. And of those, 700 and something were closed. The question then, for me, what I look at when I see this, I see people backtracking on their inability to do that work from the get-go. And I'm for the idea that we close churches if they are not, again, adhering to the zoning, adhering to this, but we need to call a spade a spade. And the fact of the matter, this issue Because people will always use elements of, it will always use elements of society to do ill. Some people will use a business. We've just talked about what the Catholics did. People are now using the Pentecostal Protestant churches because there's no structure. So they're using them to do their malice. Now, what the problem, in this case, when you ask me specifically why we are going and closing so many churches, is that from the get-go, somebody didn't do that job. These churches should not have been given permission to operate from the get-go.
All 700 of them.
Yes,
Should
we
have been less
shouldn't
than
have.
that.
We shouldn't be here. Prevention is always better than cure. You don't go wake up in the day. You have not taken care of yourself. You've fallen sick, and now you start to sit there and you're like, you blame somebody else and say these people didn't take care of me, or you start to So for me, I would say somebody didn't do that job, and we can talk about it as a nutshell. But I would say from the get-go, these churches should not have been given the permission
to mushroom
operate
all over the city.
Yeah. But just before Bana comes in, I know Bana, I'm worried she's going to take an extremely hardline approach on this one. Yeah. But I want to give a few examples of where we got this wrong, and it's become really a very, very burning ulcer. If you look at the churches that had mushroomed around Kigali, and I'm talking about physical structures, not the sects they belong to or where they come from. You had people worshipping in swamps. You had people in mabati houses going there to worship. You had people who had converted shops into churches. You had people who had converted conference halls of hotels where guests are sleeping into prayer houses. So, and this happened for decades. So where was that person looking? And I think that's where people need to be brought into. You raise an extremely pertinent
But
point.
it goes with
Where is this person who's closing the church
who
now?
allowed
Where
this
was
to,
he
where
in
were
the
they?
beginning?
So
That's the question.
there's somebody
After
who
the first
slept on
100,
the
after
job.
the first 200,
there's somebody
the
who
first
slept on the job.
300.
But the point then is, I am extremely pessimistic that the closure of the churches purely because they do not meet zoning guidelines is not a solution.
Bernard, your take on this?
Yes.
Before we end, we are running out of time, so
First
your
of all,
take on this?
I'm glad it's happening because we are finally having, people talk about this. It's been an elephant in the room because we all know that where issues of faith are concerned, there's always room to manipulate people. And I'm glad that, government is really coming forward to take a stand on this. Because once you don't do that, you're always going to have, especially vulnerable people, manipulated in this whole process. So I'm glad it's happening. Two, I think we need to go back to address the issues around why people always look up to religion and faith, because in most cases, it is disoriented people, someone is frustrated, why am I not getting a job, so there's a link,
people say, you've heard the saying, religion is the opiate for the masses.
Yes. So there are issues in our society that we need to address that, lead to that sense of disorientation. If it's unemployment, are we doing our homework? If it's the state of healthcare, because, you'll have people go to the church and say, my pastor is praying for me, I'll feel better, That speaks to the health system in a way. So let's do our homework and give no room for people to be manipulated, especially vulnerable people, because it's very easy for you to walk to a village and tell people that, look, I've got the cure for HIV, and perhaps the other issue is we still have some religions, even, forget about the born-again Christians. You have religions that tell people, you can have as many children as you can, which we know we can't afford to do that, So it's a complex issue, but I'm glad that finally we are taking action, and I think it has to go beyond Kigali because
it will actually go
yes,
beyond Kigali.
because the vulnerable people, most of them are not actually around Kigali. You will have the backlash from the masses because faith as it is, of course, is very personal, but I think we have to really be decisive.
And just very quickly, Ephraim, I'd like to ask you, also still on this whole concept of Christianity. As a Christian, for the longest time, I'm trying to reconcile my idea of Christianity versus the erasure of African cultural traditional practices. You know, as Jomo Kenyatta once said, when the missionaries arrived, you know that saying, the Africans had the land and the missionaries had the Bible. And they taught us how to pray with our eyes closed. And when we opened our eyes, they had the land and we had the Bible. What's your take on this?
You know, again, I'll say this. Religion is so personal. Actually, let me not even call it religion, faith.
Faith.
You know, because you talked about, even when you talk about why people cling to faith, there's a search for meaning, there's a search for actually meaning to life. And I think that is the largest. Why was I born? Because there's so much that's beyond my comprehension. I need to find something that can tie it all together or give it meaning. Now, I genuinely believe that if you look at the history of humanity, the Bible in its current state has been translated over and over and over again. And I believe the same thing has happened with our interpretation of who God is. Now, I just told you earlier that people use various things as various elements in society as tools to push an agenda. Somebody wants to make a bit of extra cash, he uses a church and takes advantage of people. Somebody wants to, let's say, example, launder money. He will set up a business that seems legit just so that he can clean his dirty money. People will always use elements of society to take advantage of society to benefit themselves. Now, what people don't know is that there is also another brand around this. In Botswana, there was a missionary called Robert Moffat. And if you know anything about Botswana, Botswana was not a colony. It was not colonized by the British. It's what they call a British protectorate. They went to the Queen and asked that they be protected. Now, what were they asking to be protected from? They were trying to be protected from the Boers. These are the Dutch people in South Africa who were trying to capture. Exactly, who were trying to capture.
The Dutch hyenas.
They were very ruthless. They were trying to capture states, capture as much land as they could. Coming back to this whole thing. Now, they were using violence. They weren't using a Bible. Now, what happened is these missionaries were organizing for the smuggle of guns to equip the locals, so that these locals could be armed to face. And it's actually through the help of such missionaries that these guys were able to fend off the invasion of that land. Now, that is one example of good. But then there's also another example of bad, where you find situations where guys would explicitly, I don't know if you know, and I know this is a theory, this was a fictional tale, but I don't know if you guys read Things Fall Apart when you
of course,
yes, of Okonkwo and the Iron Horse, the white man on the Iron Horse. When you read how they used that religion to create a caste system, even in Rwanda they did the same thing. They used religion to create that divide between people, and it was always a tool of colonization. I think religion and Christianity has roots on the continent. I just feel like the brand where Jesus is a white man and we're told certain elements, for me, that's where now you have to kind of draw the line, because it then becomes a form of neo-colonialism. Because and with this globalized world where we have technology that allows us to, the televangelist, and we have people in America impacting our lives in so many ways, and people across the world being impacted by just turning on the TV or jumping on YouTube, you find that a lot of the agendas are being pushed through that means. Most of them seem genuine, but I kid you not that there's also a good portion in there that's using them for malice and to influence us.
I totally agree with you. We've come to the end of tonight's show. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying tuned. Catch us every Wednesday at 9 p.m. on Rwanda Television. On our social media, catch us #TheSquare The Square RW, and you can also email us on thesquare@gmail.com. Do not miss repeats of this show every Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Have a good night, and thank you very much for joining us.